Hey everybody, welcome back to Nailed or Failed Reviews. Today we're starting a very in-depth 4-part video series for anybody out there with a camper trailer RV and has been researching how to develop and install a solar panel system. Over the summer of 2020, coronavirus summer, we installed a whole new solar panel system on our 2019 Coachmen Apex Nano, and we created a video series for anybody out there who's been researching, all the information that's floating around out there on how to do this. We wanted to create a nice 4-part short video series to, again, help you reference all this information, because there's a lot of information to digest about how to create this solar panel system and all the parts and pieces. I mean, there's just a lot to it. And so again, we created 4 videos today, about 25-minute long videos to help you guys understand from the very basics of how solar panel systems work to the differences in solar panels that are out there to buy, and then the parts and pieces that it takes to get it. Those will be the first 2 videos, and then in the part 3 and 4 we'll actually create a solar panel mounting system for our 2019 Coachmen Apex Nano camper trailer and then get that system installed. We're going to show you guys all those steps on how we do that so that you can get some good ideas on how to create a solar panel system for your recreational vehicle. Let's check it out right now on Nailed or Failed Reviews. On how to develop and install a solar panel system on your recreational vehicle. As you can see, there is a lot of parts and pieces that it takes to do this, and we're going to help you guys navigate all of it today. So let's get to it on Nailed or Failed Reviews. Hey, thanks again for joining us in another video here at Nailed or Failed Reviews. Again, this is going to be more of an installation type of video rather than a review video, but we will be talking about these all-power solar panels that have died on us now for 2 years in a row. But again, we're making this video to help you guys understand and give you some ideas on how to develop a solar panel system for your application, because it really depends, number one, on the framework of whatever you're installing it on. So if you're talking about an RV or camper trailer, a new camper trailer versus an old camper trailer, that is going to sort of dictate, first of all, how you can actually get solar panels installed. And then there's all these other things that you have to figure out as far as power consumption, what brand to buy, what type to buy, all the pieces that it takes to do it, how to get it connected, the batteries. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So we're trying to help you guys navigate that, and then again, give you ideas in the installation for your application. So I've got this full list here of things so that I didn't forget what to tell you. Again, we're going to have this marked out in chapters. So if you guys want to look below, you'll see the different chapter markers for what I'm going to be talking about. So the first thing we're going to talk about is why you might want solar and a little bit about what it can do and how it works. So first and simplest application is if you're just trying to keep your battery charged, because say you can't plug in your trailer at home, or you don't have a plug nearby, or maybe your RV or camper trailer is at a storage facility and you want to keep that battery charged. You can install one of these panels up on the roof, use some of these parts and pieces we're going to talk about later, and it's a set it and forget it type of thing where it's going to control the amount of power that comes into the battery, keep it topped off so it's perfectly charged for when you come back. Second application is if you're doing a lot of dry camping or boondocking, which is what we do the majority of the time. And we also have a larger battery system. We're charging a lot of stuff, running a lot of stuff. And so when you're dry camping, regardless of whatever you're doing, you're using your batteries and you need a way to charge them. So some people will use a generator, which is just, sort of a pain in the butt because you have to buy gasoline, it's noisy, it's big and you got to lug it around. And for the price of a generator, a good one, you can develop a full solar panel system and buy a full solar panel system. So that's the second application, is if you're dry camping or boondocking, you need some way to keep those batteries charged. Another application would be if you're like us, where we are running our business out of this trailer. We do a lot of different sports. We travel all over the West, and we go to different places where we're majority of the time dry camping. We're not plugging in anywhere, and so we need solar panels to not only keep our batteries charged, but to power our equipment that we're running during the day. So our two full offices with computers and monitors and all this other stuff. So if you're doing something like that, or say you have a big family that you're doing a lot of dry camping with, and they're charging their phones, and you're cooking all the time in there and just running all the things in the trailer, you're going to run those batteries out quickly, and you'll need some way to keep them charged, and a solar panel system can do that for you. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about how solar panel systems work and how they charge your batteries, because again, my inspiration for this video was when we were down in Angel Fire, New Mexico, doing some downhill mountain biking and dry camping. I was talking to this guy who said that he travels around in his trailer, and he's like, oh, I do all these different events type of things, and I'm just running a generator to keep my batteries charged. And I'd done the same thing when I first got a trailer, but I realized it's just ridiculous to do that when you can install solar panels and then you don't have to lug around a generator. So that's my inspiration for this, and hopefully you guys will stick around. I'm trying not to be too long-winded about this, okay? So the way that a solar panel system works is, number one, you have the panel, right? Okay, what you see here, and just forget about all this other stuff. But you have a panel goes into a charge controller. The charge controller goes to the battery system. Now, regardless how many batteries you have, don't worry about that right now. Charge controller is the main thing that you need to get along with solar panels, because this is what tells the battery, or this is what charges the battery, and then what stops charging it once that battery reaches capacity. So there are two types of this. There's this is a PWM charge controller, and then there's an MPPT charge controller that I'll show you a picture of here, because ours is already installed. So this is what it looks like. And what this again does is you tell it to charge to say 14 volts, and then once it gets to that from the solar panels, it stops the power, and then basically float charges that battery for as long as you want. Doesn't matter how long, as long as the solar panel is putting out, this thing will control the battery and charge it properly. So beyond that step is if you want to use outlets from the battery system that the solar panels are charging, that's where you get an inverter. And so let me talk just real quick about what an inverter versus a converter is, because there are two different things that you're going to hear about. So the way that it works right now to power the outlets in your trailer is you have to be either plugged into your house or you're running off a generator, right? Now, what you can do is you can hook up a solar panel system to your batteries, and then your batteries to an inverter, which again I'll show you here because ours is installed already. And then that inverter usually has like 2 or 3 plugs on it that you can plug into, like say a charging strip, and then you could just plug all your whatever you need to into that. Or you can run power from that inverter to your main system that's already built into the trailer. You splice it into the main power line that would come in from the house, and then you can actually run all of your outlets that are built in stock from the factory. And so that's how we have it set up, and that should be your goal, okay? So that when you're dry camping, you can use all the outlets in your camper trailer and your batteries are getting charged. So that's what we're talking about. And the converter right now, when you're plugged into the house, that takes the house power, converts it down to 12 volt to charge your batteries and to run that 12 volt system, and then the 120 volt runs all the outlets, right? So again, that's what the converter is, and then the inverter takes 12 volt, runs it up to 120 so that you can run those outlets as well as the 12 volt system. But what you do is you turn off the breaker that runs the converter so that you're not charging your batteries from your batteries. And that's a whole nother thing. You can watch our other videos on installing and developing a battery system. Okay, so now you know how a converter and an inverter works and what the overall goal is of having solar panels and a battery system and all that stuff. You want it, basically your end goal should be to be able to power all of your outlets while you're out on the road, okay? And so now what we're gonna get into is the parts and the pieces, and that's gonna start with the differences in solar panels. Then we're gonna get into figuring out how big of a system you need, so how many solar panels you actually need and how you figure that out. Then we're gonna talk about construction, so roof construction of your application, as well as frame construction of it for running the wires. And then we're gonna talk about these, finally we're gonna finish off with these small parts that are gonna help you connect everything together and get everything installed. All right, solar panels. Now there are two different types of solar panels. There's flexible, which we're going to be talking about today and installing. And then there's this picture here of a regular glass rigid panel that has an aluminum frame around it. Now the biggest difference is that it has a aluminum frame and the glass covering on it, which protects it from everything, UV light, as well as like hail and stuff like that, branches and whatnot. When you talk about a flexible panel, it's just that. These are made of different types of plastics, and they're flexible depending on the brand that you get to different degrees. So like these that we have here are flexible to about a 30-degree arc, and then some of the newer ones, they can go even more than that so that you could bend them around something that's even a tighter angle. So again, the biggest difference is that a flexible panel does not have any type of frame around it, and it has no glass covering as the outer top layer, okay? Now, what that leads to is that a glass framed one can last much longer than a flexible panel. The problem is that a glass panel, solar panel, is around 20 pounds or more, depending on the brand that you get, the different wattages that you get. So there's 100 watt, which these panels are as well, and then you can get 200, 300 watts. You know, you can get ones that you put on your house, for example, and put it on your trailer if you really wanted to. So there's that difference in the weights and the construction of them. So we're talking about flexible panels, so that's all I'm going to say about glass panel, regular aluminum frame panels. There's plenty of people that install these on all types of applications, but again, we're not doing it today because of their weight and the roof type that we're installing this in, which we'll get into. So when you talk about the differences in flexible panels, there are a few different construction types that we'll talk about right now. And the first type that we're going to show you, and that has failed on us for 2 years now in a row, is this All Powers panel. Now, I've worked with All Powers on trying to get these warranted, as well as for the first year, and then as well as the second year. So the first year they warranted them, and they said, here's another set, we're going to warranty those for 36 months, and then this is that second set, and they failed on us again. They basically last for 1 year, and then All Powers didn't honor that warranty. They only gave me 90 bucks back for one panel, so they didn't even give me you know, a full amount of a panel back for the price I paid. So that was really a letdown, so definitely take your chances with All Powers. Now this is a Geo solar panel, and this is an ETFE panel, and this is a little bit different, and so that's what I wanted to point on. So ETFE is the outer coating, the top coating that you see here. The top coating on this All Powers panel is called PET. Now there are two different types of plastics, and just to get to the point, this PET panels, or sometimes you'll even see the top layer called EVA, and you can see these in these images here of panel construction. And what the problem is that these PET panels especially, they are affected by UV light. So the UV light basically breaks them down. We live in the West, and we're traveling out to California, so we're traveling through Utah and Nevada and desert after desert, you know, 60 mile an hour and higher winds. The car's getting sandblasted, the trailer's getting sandblasted, and I can't even imagine what the abuse that these panels are taking on the roof. And you couple that with the intense UV light of being out in the West and in the desert, and it just breaks these down. So again, these lasted, the first set lasted for 1 year, the second set lasted exactly for a year. We come out in the spring to get the trailer set up, and the charge controller shows that the panels aren't putting out any power. So again, that's the main differences that we're talking about in flexible panels, is the outer coating, and this is the cheap ones are called PET or EVA. That's going to be the most popular type that you see around on Amazon and elsewhere, and the cheapest type. And then the second more expensive type is going to be the ETFE coating. So let's get into what that is all about. Now the ETFE coating is supposed to be superior to the PET coating, again, like I mentioned, because the PET is affected in the long run by intense UV light, whereas the ETFE coating is not. For some reason, just the type of plastic that it is not affected by that, and they say it should last a lifetime actually. So the main difference when you talk about looking at the closely at the surface of an ETFE panel is that it is bumpy. It has a bunch of ridges and humps in it, and what that works to do is actually works to refract the sunlight so that it can pull in more power from the sun that's coming in compared to a regular PET panel. And so that's what you'll notice, is that on a PET panel, you'll see that these are really shiny and smooth looking when they're brand new or if they get wet. But once they dry up or once they get a little bit old, you'll see that they get all hazy like this. And basically, like I said, that's the UV light has broken down that outer layer. And also what happens is that when you're traveling, these will get dirt all over them. And what you have to do with these cheaper PET panels is you actually really need to get up on the roof every time you travel somewhere and wipe them down with a wet cloth, because what can happen is that dirt will basically get baked into the plastic. It contributes to the haziness. And I even tried using headlight polish for my truck that I use on my truck headlights on this, and it wouldn't work. It sort of took it away, but it just wouldn't bring in any power. So again, that's why we decided to upgrade to the ETFE panels, because that top layer is not affected by the weather or the UV light like that. And it is also self-cleaning. So what happens with these, like I mentioned with the PET, you have to wipe them down. With these ETFE panels, you can actually just utilize rain or hose them down, and they're supposed to be quote unquote self-cleaning. So again, that's supposed to be an advantage to them. But in the end, when it comes down to the other differences about these panels, there are no other differences. They both have grommets to do mounting, which is what we're going to be using this time for our mounting system. The junction boxes all have diodes in them. They're all standard junction boxes on all these panels you'll see. I will say that from what I can tell, based on the images and the looks of the different panels, that it looks like there's basically one company out there in China that's making these, and then these different brands are slapping their name on them and selling on Amazon and elsewhere. So just be aware that, you know, there are some differences, and you probably will get better service with some of the better well-known brands, and to take your chances with some places, with some companies like All Powers. The last difference I'll mention that you'll see in solar panel brands is the size and the weights of them. This All Powers panel is actually 50.5 inches long, and this Geo Solar panel is only 39 inches long. Now they all are usually between 19 to 22 inches wide, and these two are actually the exact same width. But you can see here the difference in length. So I have them just lined up here, and you can see that there is a big difference in the length of them. So again, depending on the brand that you go with, the size of your RV or camper trailer roof is going to determine, you know, how many panels you can put up there, and the sizing could be different. So that's something to take into account. Okay, so now that you know the differences between solar panel types, we need to get into talking about how many do you need and how do you figure out that. So the first place I would start would be to draw a layout of your roof. Get up there, take a tape measure, measure your roof out, find out the solar panel dimensions, and then lay that out on the drawing just like you see here. Now this was our original layout, and we only ever used 2 panels, but we knew that we could put this many on here. So 3 on the side here, 2 in the front, 1 over here on the side, and then 2 behind the air conditioner. Now that was based on the length of the All Powers panel. So now that we have the Geo Solar panel, we actually have a shorter length, so technically we can fit these in a different orientation. And so that's what we've come up with here. As you can see in these drawings, that we're going to be putting the panels all on the very front of our trailer. So that's one thing you have to figure out, is my roof layout, you know, what are all these things on there, and based on the dimensions of the solar panels, how many can I fit on there? Now I'll just say, not everybody's going to need, you know, 6 panels or 10 panels. This is just to figure out where you can put them, and again, the orientation that you can have them based on their dimensions. So start there, and that'll make your life a lot easier. The other consideration that you have to take into account is how much power you're using, as well as the size of your battery system. And so again, for our application, because we're working during the day, wherever we travel, when we're on the road, we work all day long, or most of the day, and then we go out and we play sports or do whatever we're doing. And so we have 2 full computers that we need to run, external monitors, and we're charging all this other stuff. So what we're trying to do is make sure that, number one, our batteries are charged or topped off during the day, and also have enough power coming in to actually run the equipment that we're using at that current time. So as long as we have enough sun coming in with 6 panels, we can actually keep our batteries topped off, as well as power all the equipment that we're using during the daytime, okay, if that makes sense. So if that's something that you're doing, then again, that's going to determine how many solar panels you're going to need. If you're just trying to charge your batteries, you're not using a bunch of equipment, you're only going to need a couple solar panels. If you only have 1 or 2 batteries, you're only going to need a couple solar panels. But if you're like us and you have all this equipment as well as 4 batteries to charge, you're going to need more solar panels to do that. The last thing you need to consider is where you're camping. Now, if you're camping in the east, you might be camping under trees all the time. If you're camping in the desert, you might be exposed to sun all the time. You might not have to worry about much except for some clouds randomly. If you're camping in the west along the coast, you might run into a marine layer like we've run into before, where we were camping for days and days in state parks along the California coast. The marine layer comes in the morning, completely blocks the sun all day long, and your panels will only draw a very little amount of power. So if you increase the number of panels, you will have more power coming in, even though it's at that lower rate. So again, depending on where you camp, if you're in the desert, you can say, hey, I know I'm going to be somewhere where I'm getting 100% sun, completely unobstructed for 12 hours a day. You may only need 4 panels. But if you're, again, like in the East Coast, you're going to be under the trees all the time, you might need more panels just so that they can draw in, you're having more power come in from each panel set or each panel individually. So you got to consider that. Okay, so we talked about the layout and trying to figure out how many panels you actually need based on your power consumptions and how many will physically fit on your roof. You have to take that one step further based on when you're talking about the length of wire that you have to run from the main group of solar panels to your charge controller, and then the type of charge controller that you're going to use. So we're going to start with talking about the layout and how we are connecting our solar panels together, because that relates to the wire and the charge controller. So again, we talked about the layout and saying, okay, are we going to hook our panels together in series or parallel? And this is going to have to do if you have more than 2 panels. So basically you could say the rule of thumb is that if you have 1 to 2 panels, you're going to use a PWM charge controller. And if you have more than 2 panels, you want to use an MPPT charge controller, which we'll get into later. So what we're talking about here is our layout. If we have 6 panels, we're going to be joining them in sets of 2. So we have each panel set will generate 42 volts and 5.72 amps at its maximum, at the best sunlight we could ask for. We're going to join those into the system in a parallel setup so that we add the amps together and we keep the volts from each set. So we're going to have 42 volts at a maximum of 17.16 amps coming into our system. Now that's important because the amps are going to determine, your maximum amount of amps are going to determine, number 1, the wire gauge that you have to run, and number 2, whether or not you should use a PWM charge controller or an MPPT charge controller, okay? So again, like I said, if you have 1 or 2 panels, just know that you should just use a PWM charge controller and just use that. You hook your panels into parallel if you have 2 of them, and you're at the most likely you're gonna generate 11 amps at best sunlight. Now, again, since we're hooking up our panels and we're gonna have 42 volts at 17 amps, we're gonna utilize the benefits of an MPPT charge controller. And we contacted Renergy about this and asked them how we should set this up, and this is how they suggested we hook this up. Hook our panels together in series and then hook those together into the system in parallel to add those amps together. Then the MPPT charge controller, what it does is it's a DC to DC converter. That's what you look at it as. It'll take those volts, high number of volts, and convert it into a high number of amps. So what we've already seen is that I can get 300 watts coming in pumping in about 12 amps at a maximum if I'm really lucky. That will turn into over 20 amps coming into the batteries, okay? And so that's the benefit of an MPPT charge controller if you have a lot of panels, is that it can convert all those volts into a higher number of amps, and that will charge your batteries a lot faster. Now, how that plays into wire size is based on the length that you're going from your main solar panel connection to your solar controller will determine, along with the amps that you're drawing in, will determine the gauge of wire that you have to use. Okay, so we're going to show this chart here, and you're going to see how it says, okay, if you have 10 gauge, the maximum amount of amps is 30. If you have 8 gauge, it's 40, and it goes up from there. Then you can say what we're looking at was we're trying to minimize the volt loss, and what happens is the longer length of run you have from your solar panels to your charge controller, you lose volts. So you're looking here at this chart and it says, okay, for 10 gauge wire, which we already have run, if we have less than 30 amps, we can do 10 feet and we're gonna stay under a 2% voltage loss. And that's what we want. You really don't want any more than 2% voltage loss. So I know it's a lot of different numbers and a lot of different things to take into account, but that's what you have to figure out is, number one, the layout that you're gonna do, how you're gonna hook your panels together, what that maximum amount of power that can come in amps is gonna be. That's gonna determine whether or not you should be using an MPPT charge controller or a PWM. And it's also gonna determine the gauge of wire that you should be running and the length of wire run from your solar panels to your charge controller. Wow, so we really covered a lot already. I know it's a lot of information. We've got a few more steps to talk about, and then the second part of the video you can watch on the full installation. So the next thing we're gonna be talking about is mounting the solar panels and running the wire, the battery location, and the construction of your trailer or RV, and how that all comes into play when you're figuring all this out.